Viva ANC, viva!
ANC factionalism no doubt played an important role in what happened in July. This is not only the view of Minister Mondi Gugubele or the view of myself and other journalists.
Well, I'm not sure if it's fair to really attribute what happened in July last year to factions in the movement. Youth unemployment and the socio-economic conditions of our people generally. That cannot be divorced entirely from the July riots. The fact that, you saw what people were looting. People were looting cooking oil. People were looting meal. So people were looting body lotions. That must have told you a story of where our people are.
Really fele hayi arane ne batla fele go ithola cigarette o senya fele like always so jalo ya ke ntse tsuwa jwalo ke the way khena go tlile we gore go busy ka mantle and then ka find out jwalo gore hey square salutio and then ya ke mo khele nna ke se ke ya go teng. Yena zanga ba le details tsa gore se lutiwa ka mabaka a jwang o betse a rena square sa luti o ka re lena na sna itile but na mangcondo nyaka ha ke bale phela matsatsing before phela ne le taba tsa gore se mo tshwantsatswe a bona a tswe go tronkong dilonyana tse shwalo ke tse ding ke dutletse go ditabeng di a mo a na zanga nkela tlhokong up until that day since go tsagala ntshutse ka fela then ya ke mo le no celebrate why not re vele ke ke le na bona betlanga yeah that was that no breakage never got anything in ke ga then jola ba go tshola ba bonka ba bona di cigarette eng tse dingata furniture appliance le diaparo dijo le jwang so le nna tsa go fitla ka thola vele storeroom vele setse se butsu ke community le nna ka vele ka pusha in ka kena ka nka senkegang especially Pick n Pay ka go storeroom sa teng batho ba tsema jwala ba ngata fela ranga jola bonke ga.
It is declared that Mr. Jacob Zuma is guilty of the crime of contempt of court. Mr. Jacob Zuma is sentenced to undergo 15 months imprisonment.
The July unrest of 2021 was multifaceted. There was many failures at play, and our investigation found various things. The first was a failure by the state, and the most important thing was that even though there was intelligence warnings that this may happen as early as May that year, there was little action to actually put in place mechanisms to quell the unrest, even when the unrest already began.
the former president has been sent inside the Escort Correctional Service at this very moment. The convoy that you're seeing going inside there is the former president Jacob Zuma at this stage. You see
there was failures in terms of the structure of the law enforcement agencies, and that led to a lot of what we saw happen, where police were completely overwhelmed, intelligence was completely not on top of the situation, crime intelligence was completely dysfunctional, and eventually the South African National Defence Force had to be deployed.
So you can see 4 kinds of interlinking groups that were involved in the violence. The first one would be the planners, the people who had decided that if the former president is incarcerated, they will activate a plan to cause violence, to register a protest, and as an attempt to potentially secure his freedom and force a political settlement. So they would have been the top tier of people who probably would have had training and experience in intelligence and state security agencies. Then you had the next group of people below them who were actually going out and hijacking trucks and blockading roads and instigating people on the ground. When that started happening, other groups, which we would have called the third group, would have been local criminal networks who are involved in a whole range of illegal activity at a local level, saw this happening and then took an opportunity to get on board. So they realized they could see that the police were overwhelmed and not being able to respond effectively. Then the fourth group are your sort of more ordinary civilians who are poor, impoverished, and they would have then taken an opportunity. So the first group that would have hit them all would have been these organized criminal networks. They would have left them all open and exposed, and then other people, your opportunists we would call them, would come in and start stealing food.
Viva ANC, viva!
ANC factionalism no doubt played an important role in what happened in July. This is not only the view of Minister Mondi Gogobele or the view of myself and other journalists, but also what the report by Professor Sandy Africa found and evidence that the South African Human Rights Commission inquiry into the July unrest has heard. The reality of the situation was that a faction of the ANC was angered by the decision of the Constitutional Court by Justice C.C. Kampepe that former President Jacob Zuma be charged with contempt of court and be sentenced to 15 months imprisonment as a result of repeatedly violating the apex court, the Constitutional Court.
Well, I'm not sure if it's fair to really attribute what happened in July last year to factions in the movement. Youth unemployment and the socio-economic conditions of our people generally. That cannot be divorced entirely from the July riots. The fact that, you saw what people were looting. People were looting cooking oil. People were looting meal meal. So people were looting body lotions. That must have told you a story of where our people are. There are also socio-economic conditions of our people which can't be divorced from that. Fatigue coming out of COVID can also not be entirely divorced from that. To link this to factions in the African National Congress, it's a bit unfair.
What happened there is that they robbed that factory twice. They stole, and then they stole this valuable stuff. Unfortunately, I've got a call first thing in the morning. Tell me that, listen, your contract has been terminated. Don't come here anymore. So as soon as I find out, I was not only one. I think there were 3 of us. because it's me and another 2 girls. Even now, it's like I'm dreaming. So it's like, okay, I believe it after a week. I said, wow. I said, I'm not wake you, because I don't have income, never got a kid, got a baby. So they look it after me. So like, guys, see now things are very bad.
I'd say the retail space, largely, which pretty much covers mostly foodstuff, as well as your clothing, your electronics, pretty much all the retail businesses that are largely concentrated into malls. I would say those are the ones that really took the biggest knock. Actually, even including some of the distribution centers. So you'd find that the distribution centers, they send goods to the various shops in various areas. So those were targeted as well, because that's where you have like really a whole lot of items that are to be distributed at a wholesale level. So those were pretty much the ones that were affected the most. How much insurance was claimed? Well, I'll give you two perspectives. I know for a fact on our side, the total amount of incurred losses sitting around between 35 and 37 billion rands. That is the total amount that we as the insurance company have been responsible for. But I think it's estimated to be just below 60 billion rands in total, the total economical damage that was caused by this particular event.
Look, if you just contextualize the riots from last year and just ask a question, small businesses, do they have the ability to rise and recover after such damages? The answer is they don't. Because one, mostly they are run by people that do not have access to financial means to be able to build back. Two, you find that most of the small businesses are not insured, which means they do not have access to insurance products that would make them to be able to claim and rebuild back and recover quickly. And three, access to financing for small businesses has always been difficult, which means the people that run those small businesses will not be able to go to a bank or a DFI and ask for financing to rebuild. And as a result, most of those are unlikely to come back. The economy contracted by 1.8%. We had a number of sectors that contracted. We had mining sector contract. We had construction, which has been in contraction for a couple of quarters. We also had manufacturing, registering one of the largest contractions after a couple of quarters of positive growth. And then we had trade, which essentially your retailers, your wholesalers, which would be the sectors that have been largely impacted by the pandemic, particularly in KZN, also contracting. And then we had tourism contract as well. So a number of sectors that contracted in the economy. All in all, the 1.8% contraction in economic growth overall equates to about 81 billion rand in contraction. That is the magnitude of the impact that we saw.
We are paying more for basic commodities because largely, if you're looking at, for instance, at some of the suppliers that are in areas like KZN, for instance, or others that in other areas that are now not able to go into some parts of KZN, as an example. So logistically, if the logistics become constrained and they cannot get to those areas, then it means, again, it affects the supply. So when the supply is affected, then it means your basic commodities then get affected as well.
Have we done enough to solve some of the problems that led to the riots? The answer is definitely no. And of course, what are those problems that we have currently? High unemployment rate, as I alluded to earlier, high poverty rates, high inequality. And you can couple that, some of the inequality, the way they manifest themselves is people stay too far away from their places of work, and public transport system is not so efficient.
With regards to the police have suffered serious deterioration since 2012. The ability of the police, for example, to solve murders has dropped by over 50% in the last decade. The ability to solve armed robberies has dropped by over 30%. And they've lost quite a lot of personnel because the budget has been stabilized, but inflation's growing, and so they've lost about 8 to 10% of their personnel since 2012. It's important to note that fixing criminal justice systems and intelligence agencies is not a very quick overnight thing. So we need to expect that it'll take a few years, because these agencies were damaged over a long period of time. The first agencies to be negatively affected by state capture under former President Zuma's administration were the security agencies: crime intelligence, the police, state security, National Prosecuting Authority. He put people there in order to protect his own personal interests and to keep him in power, and those people did massive damage to those organizations. So we've just seen them largely, over that period of Zuma's administration, largely collapsing. And we have a new national commissioner, which is a very positive development. General Masomela has only been there since the 1st of April. I'm sure that he's been told by the President and the Minister of Police to get cracking and to try and strengthen the South African Police Service. So I imagine that there is a process underway to do that.
There has to be a concerted effort to say who must be held responsible. Who are the kingpins of this unrest, number one. Number two is who in the state security apparatus allowed it to happen. Why are there no disciplinary processes underway? Why are there no arrests of police officials, of law enforcement officials that allow these things to take place? And you will realize that not much has changed since that unrest, and government has not taken heed of the lessons during that time, and that is very worrying. Number one, not much has been done to beef up the state security apparatus so that something like this doesn't happen again. Yes, the president's made 2 appointments. There's a new police commissioner, Fani Masimola. There's a new head of a state security agency. But fundamentally, no one has been held responsible for why the unrest was allowed to happen, and not much has changed in the state security apparatus, which puts us at risk for this to happen again. The second thing is, we can no longer be in denial about the problems that we have in relation to socioeconomic challenges, about the legacy of apartheid spatial planning, about the fact that you had pockets of privilege surrounded by seas of poverty in areas like KwaZulu-Natal. I think that it was a moment of reckoning for this country to understand that the social cohesion is so at risk because of these failures, and that anything can ignite the anger and frustration of ordinary South Africans. I think the third point is that we cannot ignore the complicity of the ANC in the situation of what happened in July. I think we as a society cannot accept the fact that ANC Internal Dynamics can spill over into the streets, and you have a scenario where almost 50 billion rand is wiped off the economy and more than 350 people died as a result of that unrest.
We are confident that we are not going to see those riots. There's a lot more we need to do to avoid chaotic situations. Our public representatives must be on the ground. They must understand what is happening in communities. The projects that they plan to fund on their own budgets as departments, municipalities or provinces must be geared towards lifting the mood. It's very important. We have got the instruments. We just have to make sure that we direct their usage in a manner and way that assures the people of South Africa of stability.
As long as we have a posture on economic policy that continues to address the issues of the middle income class and the higher income class, neglecting what can transition the third economy, which is those poor people dependent on the grants from the state, to help them to transition to be active economic participants in the economy, we will continue to have the risks of riots.
I would like to believe that South Africans see through politicians now, and I think that it is quite telling that every time there has been subsequent efforts to create national shutdowns and to mobilize communities to violence, there has been a resistance from ordinary people. Because again, who felt the consequences of July? Ordinary people who had to queue for days for ordinary things like bread, people whose entire lives and livelihoods was completely wiped out during that time. And politicians continue to enjoy their lives despite what had happened to ordinary people during those 8 days. I think we as South Africans have to realize that if we don't protect our self-interests, politicians will weaponize their own failures for their own self-interests.
Akitsole ke seteke for rona kaofela batho ba dula ba se spanisang square. So nna ke le one, I get regret. Tsa gore politics Zuma jwang na tsea ne tsadikeng le yona ntho ne ke sa tsebe gore re tla ba possible. Nka tjho gore le yena government o tsena a pusha society gore e le etsa ntho. So nka tjho ke re le yena government ya e ka ba le problem ya ga. That's sala kwala le di 350 by then. And so tlala ya ba worse. Ba retrenching, ba retrenching ba bangata ba re matsebang. So possibility ya gore ba ka boela ba lutse gape, I think it's too much. I think it's high. Come on, hey, batho ba lla batho. So hey, ya nna se ke tshofela. Because I let me say it's phela hayi. Khonzema go thola mosebetsi. Ene no re dutse mo dintlong tsa rona for sebaka se stelle ka bakeng la lockdown. So nga se re hayi re tla etsa, but if ya etsagala gape I don't tla stop on nna tla ikela ke ikele no maele.